Good afternoon. Thanks, I'm actually really pleased to be here. And that's because I actually believe in this notion of collision of unusual suspects. In fact, it's critical to the work that Saul started to describe that we do at Intel. If you believe the notion that challenges we face around markets or big social problems ride on the surface of a fabric of underlying political, economic, technological, and societal forces, then we can begin to understand the complexity that's inherent in the system and from which these problems emerge and solutions can be found. And you all address this every day, given the talks we've seen and the conversations I've had. How many people here think that the problems that they have today are more difficult and more complex than they had just a few years ago? Anybody? A few people? Yeah, many of you, thanks. And I think it helps if we can admit that we don't know the solutions to these problems. And in fact, in a complex environment, it's hard to know. And so I want to imagine building on this notion of big data, that you're sitting in front of your board of directors or your advisor or your investors, and they ask, how is big data going to affect the future of your project or company? And think about that and turn to the person next to you, and we're not going to do improv, I'm going to tell you exactly what to say. Turn to them and say, I don't know. Good. I don't know. And how's that feel? I mean, it feels, it kind of feels lousy because the assertion embedded in the question is that you should know. It's your business, it's your project. How can you not know what the impact of big data is going to be on that? And so I'm a physicist by training, and so I'm compelled, I have to quote Einstein here. And Einstein said, we cannot solve the problems today based on the thinking that we used to create them. And so we need a shift in our thinking to address the big problems that face us all today, the big business problems, social problems. And so I'm going to ask you again, think about that big data, but let's embrace the complexity of that problem statement. And now turn to your neighbor, and I'm going to ask you to say, again, you're in front of your board or investors or CEO, and they ask, how is big data going to infect your company or your project? And I want you to turn to the person and say, honestly, there's no way I can know. All right. That's different, right? That's honest. It actually is an honest assessment of the fact that there's no silver bullet for our big problems that face us today, that the intuition that we've built over years of working within one environment aren't necessarily appropriate and sometimes misleading when we're in a different environment. And so this notion of complexity allows us to actually have a path forward. So I think it's not a statement that has us throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do then. There's no way we can know. Actually, I think it does give us a path forward because it allows us to start thinking about how we together can approach a problem to know what are those underlying forces that shape those problems, those business issues, and can we map them in a way that allow us to at least have a path forward. So my career and story in advancing the science of innovation and embracing complexity begins in grad school about 20 years ago when I was a physics student studying complexity. And I was fascinated by the notion of order emerging from disorder. And so complexity is a term that we've heard a lot in this conference, and I'm actually pretty specific and precise when I use it because it is a science, it's a fairly new science, but it's the science of systems and how independent forces and agents interact to create potentially disorder, and maybe completely unpredictable chaotic disorder, but also order that can emerge from the interacting forces in the system. And the beauty that emerges from this order is not kind of the static, cold beauty of a snowflake, but it's the amazing beauty as resources and energy pass in and through the system of smoke rings or colliding waves or ant colonies or economies. And I found this notion of complexity to be really fascinating. So I moved on from graduate school and entered my career at Intel about 17 years ago. And I entered in the fab. I was one of those guys in the bunny suits, working in the big fab, cleanest environment on Earth, squeezing the laws of physics in order to make that smaller computer chip that would power our laptops, making everything smaller and faster and cheaper and more power efficient. And that's an amazing environment. It's The amount of technology that's being brought to bear there is just phenomenal. And it really honed my thinking about complexity, because a manufacturing environment is actually quite different from a research lab, right? Where we can remove all the variability in a system and isolate the factors that interest us, right? Think about genetics, where we can actually isolate the structure of DNA, the double helix, but how it interacts in a system of cells is still something that is baffling us today, and we're just getting the science to understand that. And so this notion of complexity in a manufacturing environment made me realize it's actually a very practical thing that we need to understand. In fact, the movie that was shown just before lunch of that little water droplet dropping, I elbowed my colleague next to me and I said, Mookie, that exact phenomenon killed my career for 6 months. It totally consumed me. I was in charge of a process that would spin a liquid onto one of our big wafers, which would make chips. And that little drop on that thin film made this oil slick pattern. And my management would come and say, look at that, your process is out of control. I'll talk to you Saturday afternoon and figure out what you did to solve that. And for 6 months, I worked on this problem. And as it was that, we got the high-speed camera and saw that effect. It turns out that the complexity of the system created enough order that it didn't matter anyway. So I had wasted kind of 6 months chasing that problem. Next, I dug myself out of the deep physics hole that I had created for myself. And I got an MBA because I was really interested in innovation and creating new value for the company based on technology. And so I joined our incubator. And I had the opportunity to run a variety of businesses in multiple fields, from e-commerce to robotics to optical interconnects. But the one that was most thrilling and exciting for me was something we called the biochip business. And that was interfacing silicon through a lot of material science and electronics capabilities from across Intel in order to interface with genetic testing. And we solved the problem that was talked about yesterday in terms of manufacturing DNA at scale, and then we could turn those circuits around and we could watch biological activity happen on the surface of the chip. And we were just thrilled. We were going to revolutionize personalized medicine. We were going to provide a high-resolution video to scientists who today had just a black and white photo still of the biological activity they wanted to see. And we also were addressing the business, because it was a venture, it was in the incubator. And so we were planning the business models and working with customers and partners, and everything seemed to be going right when they killed the business. So anybody else have that sense of failure, of snapping defeat from the jaws of victory? We didn't know why it went wrong. And obviously, we were pretty sad about that. The team and I were really impacted, and we didn't understand why. We didn't know why. Perhaps we couldn't know why. And so insight often comes from personal life, and it does for me. So I'm the proud parent of twin boys, triplet boys. I had fraternal twins and then one split. So I've got triplets. Two are identical, one's fraternal. So we have a little genetic experiment going on right at home. And that's really a hard problem, you can imagine, right? Dealing with 3 infants is difficult, exhausting. But it's a known problem, right? The processes are known. You feed 1 infant, you can feed 3. It's the same process, just multiplied, just scaled up. 3 car seats, 3 strollers, right? They're known solutions, right? You can go through, we used to travel quite a bit, and you go through airport, and you can, 1 car seat going through first class will take out a few people in first class, but you can do it, right? And 3, well, you get the idea. 3 will take out a few more, but the problem is scalable. It's complicated, but it's not complex. And contrast that with really the complexity in my life is that one of my boys, the fraternal guy, has autism and cerebral palsy. And if any of you yourself or people you know have kids or families with special needs kids, we spend a ton of energy and time and treasure with occupational therapy and physical therapy and speech therapy and communication therapy and craniosacral therapy and hippotherapy to try to help that child thrive and progress and be the best person that they can be. My son is also a more accurate description is he's dyspraxic. He doesn't really have an internal reference for how he interacts with the world. And so his ability to kind of understand his environment and initiate in a way that is productive is challenged. And so where really the complexity comes in is when we interface with the systems of everyday life, the types that you typical families, that's what we call you, navigate pretty well. So, the healthcare system or the education system or the transportation system. In fact, just a little while ago, we were taking a family trip, and my boys are older now, so a couple of them can scoot right through, but the third guy is in a wheelchair, and we have to kind of take him around the security and have him checked out by the TSA guys. And the TSA guys are usually very, very nice and accommodating, and the system has a process for that. But we know that process, and so we settle the two kids in, and we get them ready for a long journey, and we wait, because the process is that the TSA agent comes up, and he says, we have to do a little bit, and then you're going to be on your way in just a few minutes, and he puts his gloves on, and he takes a swab, and he swipes either his hand or his chair, and he puts it in that little chemical detector. And for some reason, I don't know why, I can't know why, he sets off the explosive detection alarm every time we go through security. And we don't know why, but we do know it's going to happen, and so the gears of the system just grind our travel experience and bring us down. But it's okay, because there's the process for that, and usually the TSA guys will go and huddle, and they'll find a manager, and they'll, because they know it's just a 10-year-old kid in a wheelchair, what's really going to happen here. But they have to follow procedure. The system requires them to do that. And so they go and they huddle and they decide, okay, well, it's actually an easy procedure. At this point, my wife goes and sits with the other two kids, because the procedure is that they have to actually pat him down, and because of the cerebral palsy, he wears this abdominal wrap with reinforcing foam on it. And so that doesn't go so well either with security guys. But it struck me, it hit me, that my biochip venture was dyspraxic. It actually didn't have a reference point within the system that is a corporation to understand kind of how to progress. We could optimize it, but we couldn't really optimize it within a system that was optimized for something else. And it struck us that this was really an interesting phenomenon, and we've benchmarked across a bunch of different companies and find this to be true. And so a few other colleagues and I had similar experiences with various ventures in the corporation. We decided to form a research group we call the Business Innovation Lab to study the fundamental science behind how innovation happens at various scales, at the corporate scale, at a market scale, and at an ecosystem scale. And again, we believe that the markets, the opportunities, ride on a fabric of interacting forces, social, political, economic, technological forces that all come together, right? And so while there's plenty of people who can, and great tools to assess an existing market, to understand how our market's going to shift or what new markets will emerge is actually a complex problem based on those interacting forces. And so we've partnered within our lab with a variety of expertise to get nuanced understanding of how those forces come together. So most of our group is anthropologists and cultural ethnographers and psychologists and ecologists. And it's this varied and nuanced understanding of that complex system that allows us to start mapping exactly what those forces look like, and then what might be the implications from a complex standpoint on a business or a new opportunity. Now, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The conversation got too complex. I was worried about weaving too many threads together. So we've heard several examples of this complexity at the conference even today, right? Who knew that a calendaring system would catalyze an after-school program that would then impact a school system, right? Or that by focusing on community would revolutionize a city that would then impact a corporation. And so we see this complexity at work already. And I know it's a bit academic, and so I'm going to give you a specific example, and it relates to what Saul was talking about with big data. So we realized from, again, the social science research that there were some fundamental changes in society happening as it interacted with technology and data in particular. And that was notions of ownership, of trust, of accountability were actually changing from underneath kind of the businesses and markets that rode on top of them. Furthermore, this notion of big data, of big cities opening up their infrastructural data through APIs, of people creating data through context and personal devices that collect location sensors and contextual information, is a resource. And that has allowed a new economy because we've got the infrastructure, the resources, and new participants. And so we suspected that there is an emerging data economy that is going to allow new participants to engage in economic value and new spirals of economic activity in ways that hadn't happened before. but we didn't know. And so what we did is, realizing that it's a complex system, we reached out through some collaborators and crowdsourced what are those factors that need to happen in order for a data economy to emerge from this complex environment. And we came up with about 100 factors, and we not only crowdsourced the factors, we crowdsourced the interrelatedness of those factors. How does the impact of open data in companies impact the transparency of data in an individual's hands? How does the user interface and data cleaning capability of our device impact economic activity in a marketplace? And we didn't know, so we crowdsourced this. And you can imagine we've got over 100 nodes with over 5,000 links and this massive hairball of kind of network analysis to be done. Now, I was going to show this to you, but I decided if I did that, I'd have to do a whole presentation, and I was looking for a picture of my family where my one boy has a shirt that says, "Freeze, I have autism and I'm not afraid to use it." But I couldn't find the picture, so I said, screw the whole thing, you'll have to use your imagination. But there's this big hairball of interrelated factors and forces. And the analysis showed, I'll share a couple of them with you. First is some of the things that we thought were actionable, the things we thought we could do, the notion of a marketplace for data that we could build where people could come and exchange data for economic value, really was too highly nested in that network. Too many things influenced it. It influenced too many things. It wasn't actionable. But it turns out there were 22 specific nodes and 4 groupings: data literacy, openness and transparency, trust and reputation systems, digital infrastructure. And those were highly catalytic. They were highly influential to everything else in the network, and they were asymmetrically so. So they were the independent factors within this complex network. And so this is where we engaged with BIF to try to understand how do we action and experiment along those key nodes within this network in ways that create new spirals of economic activity that are going to help create the new business opportunities and solve social problems for people. We're going to conclude that data or continue that data in a couple weeks at an event in New York City called The Feast, where we're going to benchmark and combine individuals' data with big city data to try to help both single mothers as they go throughout their day, as well as elderly who are kind of trapped in their home and need services. And so we're going to experiment with those economic systems. So I hope to leave you with the fact that beyond our markets, looking forward in time, it's a complex system, and all these forces are interacting. And so it's okay not to know. We can't know. It's complex. But together, through these collisions of unusual suspects, we'll have the nuanced vision and expert views in order to map that system out. And that's why I'm happy to be here and looking forward to further conversation. Thank you.